Hello, friends. It's the Cinemondo podcast with Kathy and Mark and our good
Joe
friend.
Berlinger in the house.
You guys again.
It's so good to see you, Joe.
Always great to have you on.
Always be on. Well, I actually my arm is killing me. So if people see me twinge, it's because I have 3 compressed discs in my upper cervical spine that are pressing on nerves and causing me a lot of pain. Unfortunately, I have to wear this thing half the day.
Oh my God!
Oh no!
Pushes my neck up and decompresses the disc. But
Yeah.
I don't want to wear it during this interview. So if you see me wincing, it's not because you have bad questions. It's because
I can't believe they asked me that.
Another kind of pain.
radiate.
Well, I hope you get through that and out the other side of that ASAP.
It's better when I stand. Can I stand?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a bad shot. I'll sit. And stand.
That shot. You're a director, Joe. You know what that low angle is.
So what does that imply about your character?
I don't recommend degenerative disc disease to anybody.
No.
I heard it was really cool, but okay.
I mean, everything was going great till I hit 60. I mean, seriously, in perfect health. And I'm 63, and between 60 and 63, it's been a friggin' nightmare.
Downhill all the way now.
But I can tell you, sort of after that, it levels out and everything gets good again.
I hope so. My wife's a couple older than me, and she's doing quite well. So she has some secret sauce. I don't know.
Women live longer than men.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah.
Hey, well, anyway, Joe is an incredible filmmaker who's made incredible movies like the Paradise Lost trilogy with Kathy.
Hey, that's how I met you guys.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to see those one of these days.
Also,
the Paradise Lost films were great. We met Joe through those films. It was about the West Memphis Three case. People watching this are probably very aware of those films.
Yeah.
If you're not, you definitely need to watch it. If you're seeing this JonBenét Ramsey series and you're intrigued, go back and check out Joe's other work too.
I mean, seriously, just watch anything that's got his name on it because it's all good. It's all of a certain. There's documentaries. There's like true crime documentaries. And there's documentaries about, grave, horrible injustices and things like that. But then Joe's got a way of getting into the story in a way that we experience firsthand. Is he understands the idea that he's making a film about, first of all. And that, I know that sounds like a simplified version of what you need to do when you make a documentary film. But there is a way to get into the story that other documentary filmmakers, I don't know if they do it nearly as well as Joe does.
That's right.
Well, I mean, I don't want to criticize other people who make
Let's criticize.
I appreciate the compliment. Been doing this a long time. My God.
Yeah.
Well, not only true crime, but films like Metallica, Some Kind of Monster.
Yeah.
Great rock documentary, Intent to Destroy, about the Armenian genocide, which is my heart. And then the Ted Bundy tapes, which came out a couple of years ago. All incredible films. And this one is called Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey, which was a famous case from late 1996. So we're coming up on, I think, the 28-year anniversary when this happened.
Yeah.
On December 26th. And I'll just say personally, when that happened way back in the 90s, I sort of saw, the National Enquirer and all the tabloids, and I saw the pictures of JonBenét all dressed up. And I sort of backed away from wanting to know the story for some reason. And I heard the parents were involved, and I sort of backed away. So for me to watch this, years later and get the whole story almost, fresh was incredible. And I learned so much. So it's an incredible 3-episode series. Highly recommend watching it.
How did you find this story, Joe? What made you decide?
Yeah, I was always intrigued by the story. In fact, when we made Paradise Lost came out in January of '96, and this story happened during the year of release. And I remember, despite having just made a film about the press completely getting it wrong in Paradise Lost, saying that when we were literally the only people, Bruce Sinatra, the only people saying they were innocent.
Yeah.
You think I wouldn't have fallen for it, but like I got swept up in the press coverage. My daughter Sarah was 2 at the time, and I remember thinking to myself, God, I would never put my kid in a beauty pageant. I mean, and I just fell for all the BS. And so it's so fascinating for me, years later, to be doing this with a whole new perspective. And that perspective came because I was introduced to the work of this detective named Lou Smith. The family has been keeping his work alive. He died in 2010. And, you know, I've been, so that was one thing is the work that this guy did kind of opened my eyes to the reality of the case. And the other thing that I've been fascinated with for years, and it's a theme in a lot of my work, including the much maligned Blair Witch 2. You know, the idea that when you blur the line between entertainment and reality, and between, you know, fiction and news, between entertainment and news, that line got very blurry in the early, which was the theme of Blair Witch 2.
Yeah.
You know, that line got very blurry in this case. And I think you can draw a direct line between OJ and then JonBenét and the media frenzy that happened.
Yeah.
I think you can draw a direct line to where we've landed today, where opinion journalism has replaced real journalism.
Yeah.
Where half the country, we just went through an election, and we know that half the country, you know, again, I don't want to take sides. You know, hopefully this is a period where people try to de-escalate the rhetoric or whatever, but we know that on so many issues, whether it's COVID, you know, Trump, Democrats as satanic pedophiles, you know,
Right.
You know, half the country wakes up and half the world wakes up and has the exact opposite view of reality.
Yeah.
Than your neighbor. And
Mm-hmm.
it has become very elusive. And that is a theme that has concerned me for a long time, including, you know, I did a show a couple of years ago for Peacock called Shadowland, which was about conspiracy thinking and how people come to believe crazy things.
Yeah.
And this case, to me, the JonBenét Ramsey case, was kind of the OG, the foundational case for this rise of opinion journalism where we find ourselves today.
Right.
You know, before OJ, you know, there was once a sacrosanct line between the entertainment division of a network and the news division of a network.
Yes. Yeah.
The news division of a network was not there to make money. The news division of a network was there as a public service to the viewer in exchange for an FCC license.
Yes.
And somewhere along the line in the early 90s, people realized that, hey, news can make money. And, you know, all of a sudden there was an explosion of cable networks. All of a sudden there was 500 cable networks. The OJ case kind of kicked off, which was that same year, earlier.
Yeah.
The OJ case kicked off, you know, this 24-hour news cycle that never existed before. All of a sudden you had to feed the monster of the daily headline. And ethical standards went out the window, you know, once reporting. And so when I dug into this case and realized and discovered that the Boulder police were feeding false and incriminating stories to the press to smoke them out because they locked into this false idea that the parents were guilty, it just felt like I wanted to make a comment about all of that, in addition to, you know, righting this wrong, this poor Ramsey family. Can you imagine I mean, first of all, John Ramsey is like a hero of mine now, because he's so stoic in light of what he's endured.
Yeah.
He lost his 22-year-old daughter in a car accident. A few years later, which is horrible, you know, 2 years later, his precious 6-year-old is killed and assaulted in the most horrific of ways.
Yeah.
And then he's blamed for it. And then all that blame and stress, you know, I believe, and he believes, brought Patsy's cancer back, and she died of ovarian cancer. I mean, and he's still fighting, demanding that the Boulder police do the right thing. So all of those things congeal to make me want to take a fresh look at this case, you know?
Yeah. Did you, when you were starting this documentary and as you were going through, did you discover anything that really popped out to you as like something new that should be really considered, or something they got really wrong that really you think might have changed the course of the investigation?
I don't think there's a ton of new information. There's just a very logical presentation of information in this case. It's separating fact from fiction, because a lot of previous documentaries about this have been either full-on anti-Ramsey, like this very irresponsible CBS 20 documentary 2016, in which they were, you know, sued for. They settled out of court, but the Ramseys sued them for defamation.
Right.
Horribly postulating that
Oh,
the son, 9-year-old son, did this. You know, I mean,
Right.
so
God.
but there is some new information that we did uncover. We got full access to Lou Smith's work, some of which was not available.
Right.
That was amazing. That was
And
really
also, you know, because Steve Thomas, the lead detective, who then, you know, who was convinced of Patsy's guilt and went on TV accusing her to her face, which is just another moment
Yeah.
in TV.
That was horrifying. Yeah.
unbelievable.
Mind-boggling, along with the Geraldo,
Yeah.
Oh, disaster.
God.
Yeah.
That was
which was crazy.
so great.
You know, he was sued, and there's some depositions that we use that haven't been seen before that widely, in which he admits that there was a purposeful strategy to smoke out the Ramseys. They were convinced
Yes.
they were guilty from early on, and so they fed stories to the press that were either partially true or not true at all, according to some sources, to smoke them out, you know, to make them crack, which is unbelievable to me that a police officer would do that. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
interesting. I see a lot of similarities. I mean, the other reason I found this case fascinating, I see that, as you well know, I've done a lot in the wrongful conviction space, not just the Paradise Lost stuff, but I had a show called Wrong Man, which into a bunch of cases. I did a show called Killing Richard Glossop about
Right.
Glossop, who's on Oklahoma's death row. I think is innocent. His case is in front of the Supreme Court right now. But you know, I've helped with, along with you guys, I've helped get, you know, well, you guys helped with 3. I've helped get some people out of prison, so I know something about wrongful conviction.
Yeah.
And I see so many similarities with what happens in wrongful conviction cases as what happens with this case. You have a, you know, relatively small town police force. I mean, Boulder's not like West Memphis, Arkansas, but you have a small police force who's relatively inexperienced in, you know, for the type of crime. I mean, you know, a triple homicide, sacrifice to the devil that they all thought this was. That's a, you know, what happened to those 3 8-year-olds in West Memphis, Arkansas is just not typical for crime in that area. Same thing, you know, Boulder's first murder that year was JonBenét Ramsey on December 26th. So you have a small town police force that's overwhelmed by a crime that they're not used to. They key into, just like West Memphis, Arkansas, they key into the wrong idea for the wrong reasons, and the investigation, instead of becoming an open-minded search for the truth, becomes confirming their bias, whether they admit it or not, whether they realize it or not. Anything that doesn't shine a light on the parents' guilt got kind of, you know, batted away, in my opinion. And so you see a small town police force developing tunnel vision over the wrong suspect for the wrong reasons. That's the number one cause of wrongful conviction.
Yeah,
that's right. That's
And
right.
and it's that sort of
the Ramseys weren't literally obviously convicted, but they were convicted in the court of public opinion. And it wasn't until 2008 that the DA finally apologized and they were, you know, officially exonerated. But can you imagine going through that for a decade?
Unbelievable.
Just crazy. I really like.
They still go. People still. You know, it's like, I try not to look at it but like people on Reddit and, you know, a lot of people have thanked me for like the clear-eyed presentation, but there's just so many people like attacking me, like, what about this? What about that? What about this?
What about that, Joe? What about it?
yeah.
Well, to all those whatabouts, I say,
What about?
you know, if you pick up the rock if you or I, any of you or me, were arrested for a crime that we didn't do, you could pick up the rock on our lives, just like with Damien, you know, and find things that are uncomfortable facts that, unless you have corroborating evidence, unless you have forensic evidence, they are just clues to help guide looking into that direction. But it's certainly not something to take into court or bank on, you know?
Yeah, no, it's
creating forensic evidence. Any of us have things in our lives that if you don't know the full picture, will coincidentally go, oh, that's kind of weird. Let's look at that.
Yeah.
So you have to like tune out that noise unless you have a piece of corroborating or forensic evidence. And to me, you can bat away so much of this if you just focus on the autopsy, which nobody disputes.
Yeah.
Poor little
Right.
girl, this poor little 6-year-old girl died. You know, she was choked to death with a garrote, which is
Yeah.
a sophisticated device. I don't know how to make a garrote. I don't think Patsy Ramsey knows how to make a garrote. This girl had a garrote, which is a piece of string with a mechanism to choke and let pressure off, put pressure on, take pressure off. And she slowly was strangled to death. You know that because she had petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes and heart, which is classic strangulation. And there were marks on her neck where her fingers were trying to
Oh, that was the most heartbreaking.
Yeah.
give enough room for her to breathe.
Trying. Ugh.
So, and yes, she had this massive skull fracture as well. And nobody knows whether it was ultimately the skull fracture or the strangulation that killed her, but she was being strangled while she was alive.
Yeah.
So if you want to subscribe to the idea that Patsy Ramsey was the killer, you have to believe that, you know, and the prevailing theory by Steve Thomas was that she, you know, JonBenét wet her bed.
Right.
And in a fit of rage, this mother figured out quickly, I'm going to stage a crime scene. I'm going to create this garrote. She's not dead yet. And I'm going to kill her by slowly strangling her to death. So yes, it was a staged scene because it was a fake kidnapping, but the murder itself, you just can't, if you just look at the autopsy, look at how she died, it's just, it makes a lot of this noise just go away. And the timeline and how Patsy told the story was confusing. And so, yeah, that's something that should be looked into. But like, you had, for that piece of pineapple to be relevant, you have to believe that somebody in that family took that girl, put a garrote around her neck, and slowly strangled her to death.
Right.
Just, in a family with no history of sexual abuse.
Right.
Look, I think we put in all of the top suspects who were removed by the Boulder police because they were cleared by DNA, because we think the DNA needs to be retested and the DNA is not reliable.
Exactly. Right.
All suspects should be put back on the table, and the Ramseys would be the first to say, put us back on the table, test the DNA.
Yeah.
The DNA needs to be retested for a number of reasons, but you know, I don't want to do to any suspect what was done to the Ramseys. So I don't know who did it. The point of reviewing all of those suspects is to say, hey, look, sadly, you know, there's a group of men out there who prey upon little girls. It's sad, it's sick, but sadly, it's not unique. And so that would be the most likely place to look. And a much stronger case could have made against some of these guys. Some had some ironclad alibis, but in terms of their whereabouts, but a much stronger case could be made against these guys than this crazy idea that over a bedwetting incident, Patsy Ramsey figured out how to put a garrote around her daughter's neck with a paintbrush that she had also violated her child with.
Right.
And then choked her to death. I mean, it's just nuts. We don't know who did it, but we're demanding that the Boulder police, you know, retest the DNA. You know, there were items sent to the crime lab back in the day that were tested that need to be retested. There were items, inexplicably, there were 5 or 6 items sent to the crime scene, according to our information, that were never tested. So those should be tested. And the most important thing is there's the one piece of DNA in this case involves, and it's graphic and horrible to say, but I gotta say it, you know, there was some blood of JonBenét in her underpants because of the assault with the handle of the paintbrush that was broken.
Right.
And that blood mixed with, from my understanding, that blood mixed with a unidentified foreign male DNA profile. When I say foreign, I mean non-family member.
Right.
So there is, and it's a bad sample. You know, it's like it's just enough markers to demonstrate it's an unidentified male, not a full profile. You know, think of if a paleontologist was, you know, wanting to tell you what dinosaur this is, and he finds a handful of bones, he can make an educated guess, but still an educated guess. So it does not have enough markers to it. So there is technology now where you can separate out JonBenét's DNA from this foreign male sample, and better testing can be done. And that's what we want done. That's what the family's been asking for. That's what the Boulder police say. They're doing everything possible, but they're being very vague with the family.
So weird.
Actually,
and the samples have been preserved and all that. I guess there's no question about the contamination or anything like that. Like,
sadly, one of the things that we fear is there's been such a reluctance to tell us what you're doing, to do new testing, to take it. We fear that things have been lost or something else is going on. But we don't know. And I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. They say they're in 2025 now. Big statement after the document. We're going to solve it, and
we're solving it.
I hope they solve it. They certainly don't owe me. And they didn't want to sit down for an interview. They certainly don't owe me, a documentarian, any explanation, but they owe a private explanation to Mr. Ramsey.
Yeah.
Who at the age of 80 has endured just horrible mistreatment at the hands of the Boulder police.
Right.
The of being blamed for a crime he didn't do involving his precious 6-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
They certainly owe him a very specific sit down as to what they're doing in the case. My understanding, that has not happened. But the thing that I think is hopeful, if they do have this original sample from her underpants, and they can pull out a better profile of this unidentified male DNA, that can be fed into investigative genetic genealogy, which is,
that's what I want to see.
23andMe basically, but that's been used. That has been a major tool. Family DNA has been a huge tool in the last couple of years. Morgan Nick in Arkansas was just resolved. The Green River Killer, the Golden State Killer.
Yes.
I mean, there's a big list of successful. These private labs have been offering help, but the way, in my understanding, the way policing works in this country is that there's probably 14,000 police jurisdictions, and whether it's a two-person department, police department in some small town, or it's Los Angeles Police Department, that police department has jurisdiction over a murder case, and they need to approve or invite the help, and they have not, from our understanding.
Why the reluctance? I mean, why? This is something that's been going on. They kind of messed up from the get-go by not securing the crime scene, and since then it's been a kind of a disaster. But why now, 28 years later, probably a different set of people there? Why don't they want to help figure this out?
If you guys want to read their statement at some point, they've made a statement saying they're doing everything possible, and their point of view is they're doing everything possible, and I can't say that they're not. I just know the family is super frustrated with the lack of communication and the lack of results. And so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and I hope you're doing all this testing, but I think that anyone in the media should be asking, have you done new DNA testing? Are you doing genetic genealogy with the underpants?
Yeah.
There's some very specific things that they're being very mum about. And yes, police don't generally comment on open cases, but it's almost 3 decades now. So
it's interesting, the DNA, there's pushback on the DNA, because even like the case that you profiled in your Paradise Lost movies, Damien Eccles is trying to get DNA tested from the crime scene, and they keep pushing back. They're trying not to approve it. Why? I don't understand why people don't want to solve the crimes. Like, why would you not test the DNA?
My biggest beefs in the justice system is that prosecutors will routinely fight tooth and nail over DNA testing. If somebody is in a post-conviction situation. But if you're convicted of a crime in this country and you've been sent to death row like Damien or anybody, or even life without parole, you would think that the prosecutor would want to make sure that his conviction is sound, even if he's made a mistake. And so when new technology arises or a new opportunity to do DNA testing, it's why wrongful conviction cases take a decade or two to unwind. They will fight tooth and nail not to do new testing often, not everyone. And Not everyone's bad. I mean, that's, there's
Yeah.
there's great prosecutors out there. There's great cops out there. I'm not like one of these people like defund the police, anti-police, whatever. There's good and bad eggs in everything we do.
Yes.
Prosecutors seem to have, well, what I object to is I don't think prosecutors should have the right to fight. I think there should be a law that if somebody who's been convicted of a crime has an opportunity to test DNA,
Everything.
and assuming they can figure out how to pay for it, that's a trickier issue that I can't comment on. I'm not smart enough to figure that one out.
Yeah.
But anyone who's sitting in a prison for a crime that they say they didn't commit, and there's an opportunity to test DNA, it should be a law and a right to do that. The idea that a prosecutor will fight, I'm not saying the prosecutors fought DNA testing in this case, but but there is some reluctance here to, we think, to do the testing. I think it has to. I don't know. I fear that they may have lost evidence. That's my big fear.
Yeah. Or I remember with the West Memphis Three case, there were people, the whole online community thing that you hopefully stayed out of more than we did. But there were people who were friends with the West Memphis police in those days, and they were bragging online about how they went and the police showed them the evidence and they gave them, like souvenirs and things like that. And this is while these guys were still in prison and awaiting, post-trial hearings and things. And so you're thinking, I remember thinking, well, if they do retest evidence, there's guys online who are saying, I handled that. I went in there and they let me see it. And,
pretty much anybody could go in and look at that stuff. So you have to wonder at the corruption of it. So what do you think about the ransom note? Because whenever I talk to people about this case, and I was telling them about your film and how, the Ramseys were so railroaded and it was awful. What's your take after everything you've seen and done in there? What's your take on that ransom note? Because that's what everyone brings up.
I know, and I still don't understand why people keep bringing up the ransom note as evidence of guilt. It's obviously a letter from somebody who's unhinged, just like somebody who's unhinged when the Ramseys were out at a party with friends that I believe, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, I believe that intruder entered the house, had 5 or 6 hours in the house.
Yeah.
So anybody who would, in my opinion, stun gun a little girl, drag her out of her bed, bring her down to the basement, put a garrote around her neck. I'm always very careful in how I describe this because it just breaks my heart. I want to cry every time I think about what happened.
I know, it's horrible.
So she was assaulted with I guess it's a sexual assault with a paintbrush, and then fashioned a garrote around her neck and choked her to death. Anyone who would do that is obviously not a sane person. So the note is insane. There's no rhyme or reason for it. Do I know whether it was originally intended to be a kidnapping and he didn't mean to kill her and so he did the cover? No. Do I know whether that note was just a distraction or playing with playing with people's heads and was intending to kill her? I don't know. John Douglas, who I was not able to get for this for some reason, he didn't agree. But John Douglas back in the day said to John Ramsey that his theory, his profile was that based on that letter, that the person who did this is somebody who hated John so much that he wanted to get back at John for this. I don't necessarily. I think the killer came from the pedophile world and had nothing to do with hating Ramsey. But his, John Douglas's take was that letter demonstrates that somebody had it in for John. People look at the letter. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation about handwriting samples. The truth is, 4 handwriting, according to all my research, 4 handwriting experts, 2 of whom are with the U.S. Secret Service document analysts, all, I think on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the least, John was put at 5 and Patsy was put at 4.5 because of a certain way she did her cursive script. But 4.5 is pretty low on the scale of probability. So they were ruled out as the people who wrote it. You'll see all sorts of misinformation and other
so much.
I know she wrote it, But it is, again, I go back to what I said at the beginning of this. It's a weird fact that in the same pad that she had other stuff, there's a start of another note. But to me, that's easily explainable. The guy was writing it. The fact that it's so long, people say, well, it's so long, it's a fake ransom. Yeah, obviously it's a fake ransom. Obviously it's a fake kidnapping. Staging the crime scene, but the idea that it was, this was all to stage a crime scene, it just, the crime was murder, from an intruder. That ransom note is kooky, aimed to distract, but I still, after spending 2 years on the show, I still don't see how the ransom note points to the family, because handwriting samples, they didn't pass the handwriting test, meaning they were excluded. The $118,000 bonus is one of the main things that John Douglas thinks is a reason that
that was weird.
That
was weird.
But does that mean is the family so dumb that they're going to say, oh, let me write a ransom note, let me actually do the amount of my bonus and implicate me? I mean, it's like illogical, It
was weird. Like, who would know that though? Like, that was also the weird thing.
They spent 5 hours digging around the house. I thought that bonus was mentioned in some of his paperwork in the house. It was rifling through his stuff.
Weird.
But here's something I'll tell you I'm not an expert in literally anything, but I maybe am an expert in art department on films and television, and have done a lot of graphics and fake handwriting for different people. And I'll tell you, I'm actually really good at it. I can do fake handwriting of different people, like, somebody's signature or whatever. I've done that. My hand has doubled for people. But what I'm getting at is that when someone changes their handwriting, in other words, if someone were to say, oh, I need to write a ransom note in a different handwriting than my own, it's very difficult to be consistent with it. The fact that the letter is so long, and I've looked at this thing with my critical eye about such things, and the handwriting in that letter is consistent all the way through it. And if you're doing that, and unless you're trained as a handwriting mimicker or something like that, a forger or whatever, if you're faking a different style of handwriting for the entire letter, your own it shows idiosyncrasies, your own things are going to come through it at some point. You're not going to be able to keep that up for an entire letter, especially if you're under a huge amount of stress. And I mean, to me, the fact that to me is the handwriting of someone else.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wish I'm going to steal that for the rest of my prep.
You should have interviewed Burk for your documentary.
Well, I tell you, I've worked on it. As a graphic designer, you want to do different handwritings and different things, and it's been a point in a lot of the shows that I've worked on where.
And the other thing I've heard, which is just like, give me a is and sadly it was Michael Caine, the grand jury prosecutor, who was interviewed for our show, and I like the guy, and I don't want to ding somebody with who agreed to be on my show, but he did an interview fairly recently on it was News Nation, I think with Dan Abrams on News Nation, because I listened to that interview because I was interviewed for that. I wanted to hear what he had to say, and he says, well, Patsy was ruled out with her dominant hand, but we never tested with her non-dominant hand. And are we really going to try? I'm a lefty. I can't write a to-do list on a little sticky note in my non-dominant hand. Do we really want to think that somebody wrote a multi-page, extensive, single line spaced thing in their so people hanging on to that stuff is just nuts.
You think someone who's doing that
And again, there's a lot of weird things about this case that are hard to
Yeah.
explain. There's a lot of weird things in Paradise Lost that still to this day you can't totally explain. But you have
Yeah.
to look at the forensic evidence. And
Yeah.
when again, that's why I keep going back. Look at how she was killed.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it just throws the parent theory out the window. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just seems like kind of sloppy and not like if it was a like what they're saying, like out of fit of anger, to go to so much trouble to try and cover up the crime by just leaving her in the basement. And then the fact that the cops missed her the first time, like it was sort of like John Ramsey had to find her. That to me is like, if you're really going to cover up a crime, you would not leave the body on the scene.
Exactly. Although
Like, I don't know why they would do that.
that's another big thing I get trolling on my, wherever. Which
Mhm.
Oh no.
I've got to turn these things.
Ignore it,
Yeah.
man. Take it from
Ignore it.
us.
Like,
Take
totally.
it from us.
Like people saying, "Well, he went right to her body." And killed her."
This
Killed
thing
people.
that-
Okay, well, to me, it's just a bizarre coincidence. Start in the basement because there was a cracked.
And why didn't the cops start in the basement? Wouldn't that
Well,
be the
you're-
most obvious
I
place
mean-
to look for something
and-
weird?
The thing is, they're already in the rest of the
Well,
house. They're sitting around in the rest of the house. You don't.
Yeah. And
It's
how-
like when you think about your house, you're like, okay, I can see, if I look through that door, I can see the kitchen and the living room, and I can go walk 2 seconds and be over here, but the basement is a separate area. And that's like, if I was, somebody said,
First
look
place
around
to
your
look.
house, it's the first place I'd go, is the place that I don't have immediate visual access to.
And even if you were to say, okay, it is kind of strange that John found his daughter and he went down to the basement, but like,
Yeah.
how stupid would he be to be the
Right.
guy who finds the body?
Yeah.
The cops missed it. Leave it alone.
He would not go down there. He would leave it for someone else to find and then go, oh my God, that's, I mean,
There's so much of that in this. That's why that makes it such an amazing
Yeah.
thing. I mean, the initial Boulder detective, I can't remember her name, but she kept talking about John Ramsey's eyes.
Yeah, Linda,
yeah.
We've
Meanwhile,
heard
her
that
eyes,
before.
I mean,
Yeah.
counting the bullets in her shoulder holster because she didn't feel safe.
right.
A parent whose child has
Crazy.
been murdered. I don't feel safe
know.
around this guy. One thing I like that you use in your series is the 3D of going through the house in
Yeah.
a very streamlined way. That
Yeah.
was fascinating
It's
because
very helpful.
you're thinking in the basement, go to the door in the kitchen, goes down. No, it was super weird the way, you had to climb in through.
Maze. Yeah.
I thought that was really fascinating because they were saying, well, he could never find her bedroom. It's like, if he had the 5 hours, and he's wandering around the house, not so weird. But I thought that was a really, really good way to depict like how that house was built and how weird and
Yeah.
convoluted it was.
It's a great device for crime
really
things
good.
to actually get a feel for the
Mhm.
space and the arrangement and the layout
Yeah.
of the scene.
I'd never
because
seen that before. That was
Yeah.
good.
yeah.
We tried to film at the house, but the current owner did not want us in. So
I'm sure.
Oh,
I can't believe the house still standing.
I know. I'm
It's like,
surprised
you think they
it's
tear
not
it down
been- Yeah.
Oh God, they must have so many people standing in front of their house.
Ugh.
Who do you think was the most interesting interview that you feel like got kind of a changed the basic facts of the case in a way? Like I would assume it's the tape.
I mean, some of that material has been seen before, but like a really giving it its due.
Yeah, like really up front.
Yeah.
I thought that was strong. I think John Ramsey was a strong interview. I mean,
Yeah, it
I
was.
mean, that's the thing. It's like this is the other thing I'd like people to know is like, I reached out. Do you want to do this? It didn't take a lot of convincing. He looked me up online and saw that I'm someone with some integrity. He didn't ask to be paid. Not that we pay people, but unfortunately, that's become a thorny issue in our business these days. Everyone wants a big paycheck. So not once did he ask for money. Not once, and nor was money given. It wasn't even discussed. He did not ask to see the questions in advance, which sometimes people ask for.
Wow.
There was no questions that were off limits. There's not one thing he said, I don't want to go down this road or this road. Not once. And he was willing to do it. I mean, so here's a guy who's 80, who's been living with this for 3 decades. Like, if he was the killer, do you think he'd be like stirring the pot up right now? I don't.
Right.
I know. Seriously.
All
Yeah,
that makes
just-
perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, it's an amazing documentary. It's #1 on Netflix. And if you haven't seen it, please, 3 episodes. You'll watch it all in one sitting. Believe me, you'll just go next
yeah,
episode.
there's no way you can't
That's what
watch
we
it all
did.
at once. Yeah. Burn through that.
Yeah.
So good.
I'm I'm proud of it because what I try to do, and I don't, look, obviously true crime, and I hate that phrase. I think we've talked about
Right.
this before.
I know. Yeah.
I'm a true crime pioneer. I like the pioneer part, but not the true crime part, because true crime,
Right.
it has the connotations of like just wallowing in the misery of others
Yes.
without any social justice component to it. And there's a lot of irresponsible stuff out there, and a lot of
Yes.
the shows that have covered this in the past have tried to have it both ways and make it a debate. No debate,
Yeah.
Parents are not guilty. So, anytime I want to do a true crime thing, I ask myself, is there a needle is somebody wrongfully convicted? Is there a law that can change? Is there a reason to tell this story? So I really felt there was a strong reason to tell this story. I think the killer will be found if they do this testing. It's not ironclad, but I think the best technology is out of place, particularly with this genetic genealogy that's been used in other cases successfully. I think technologically it's never been better to solve the case. And I think, I hope John Ramsey has another decade or two to his life, but he's 80, and I'd really like him to, this world knowing who did it.
Compelling. And thanks, Joe, for coming on and spending some time with us.
Always fun.
Yeah, and thanks for keeping on making these really discussion provoking films, because after we watch all of your movies, I see the one for Whitey back there. It's another pretty great one. Your poster behind you.
Yeah.
And but my wife and I watched this JonBenét thing, and honestly, I remember I have the same feeling that Mark did. To me, I just felt that this was a bit of a kind of the whole beauty pageant thing just turned me off of everything. And one pretty profound line in this series to me was,
I know what you're going to say.
I think the Ramseys are guilty of being naive.
Yeah.
And I think sadly that it's not a crime to be naive, but it does seem you do, and you said it too, you do say, I would never do that with my child, but it's a different culture, or it is a different time. People do different things than we may decide to do. And you can't and you also had a moment of Nancy Grace in there, which I always thought she was the downfall of everything. And the woman who was saying, talking about what JonBenét was doing with the saxophone, and then you see the footage and you're like, come on.
So terrible. I loved how you just cut back and forth.
And I wanted to leave the clip long so that you see pick up and put down that saxophone. And
that she doesn't do anything in the middle. Yeah.
Right. Nothing happening.
Right.
Insane.
So weird.
But it's that kind of thing that you see it, and like Mark was saying, that this case kind of turned me off. I'll just say that I didn't really want to get into it very much.
It's very disturbing.
And to be perfectly honest, I thought these parents probably did it. That was the assumption, and you assume that immediately.
We were all fed that. Oh.
What's that?
We were all fed that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and then you sort of move on without digging any deeper into it. I never read any books about this case, or I never watched any other document. This is the first documentary I watched about it. And it answered, it sort of, it's like, okay, I understand now. And I understand why I felt that way. And I realized that line, they were guilty of being naive. I think that to me is the most profound moment in the whole thing. That's the only thing they're guilty of.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I like that line too. And, who's to pass judgment on what parents do? And they certainly been punished for it. But,
right.
Right.
I believe the killer came out of a pedophile who came out of the pageant world. That's where.
Yes. That's pretty clear.
Makes the most sense
to me.
Yeah. I don't agree with John Douglas that it was somebody who just hated him,
Right.
I don't think that had anything to do with
it.
If you hated him, you would have attack him, I mean, first of all, but
I agree. I think the pageant world makes sense. It was very high profile. It was, that's where it is.
Well, everybody watching should check it out on Netflix, because it really is brilliant stuff and very compelling. So thanks again, Joe.
It's a show that you'll watch and you'll be talking about it after you watch it.
Named Craig Dentrone that I want to give a shout out to. He did a great job. The whole team did a great job.
Yes, definitely. That was a
Yes.
complicated case that is very familiar to a lot of people that got it wrong. So it was good to see a more clear-eyed, refreshed version of like everybody is always like, oh yeah, I know that Joan Ramsey case for the parents. I'm like, no, you got to watch this because that's not what it is. You need to watch it again.
Yeah,
So
and it
that was
didn't
really
linger. It didn't linger on the pageant, the whole pageant thing. We didn't see a whole ton of
Yeah.
that and have that be like, look how,
Yeah.
look at this. It was a part of their lives at
Yeah.
the time, and you see it for what it really is in the film. It's
Yeah.
not. I don't know. We could go on and on with this one.
I hope they solve it. I hope this is a little
Yes.
bit extra new pressure for them to like, get it down into it and solve it.
I hope so. I hope
Yeah.
so. But anyone listening in Colorado should demand that the Boulder
Yes.
do some testing,
That's right.
do DNA
Very-
testing.
Yeah.
Maybe they are. I want to give them the benefit
Maybe they are.
at this point.
They might be.
We hope so. It
Yes.
needs to happen. All right,
Thank you
Joe.
so much.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks,
Hang
Joe.
out
It's
for a
always
sec.
good to see you and talk with you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Hang out for a
Bye.
bit after this ends.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Take care, everybody.